My name is Joel Betz. I'm the Regional Medical Officer with the Emergency Center in the Phoenix market over the hospital satellite emergency departments. And today I wanted to record a version of the recent training that we did with the facility medical directors at our FMD day about positive leadership and those type of things. And was asked to be able to do that and looking forward to doing that. Recently, I've been kind of undergoing a fascination with the Navy SEALs, and I've always kind of enjoyed the military type movies and learning and books, but recently kind of zeroed in on the SEALs, and especially with a gentleman named Jocko Willink, who was a Navy SEAL team leader and wrote some books. He's written some books about how the leadership that's taught in the SEALs can tend to be applied to other aspects of the business world or team building. And I love this quote in his book, and so I wanted to include this. But as it says, as SEALs, we operate as a team of high caliber, multi-talented individuals who have been through the toughest military training and most rigorous screening process anywhere. And if you're interested in looking that up, if you've not seen that before, it's pretty amazing and pretty intense, the training that they go through. But he says in the SEAL program, it's all about the team. The sum is far greater than the parts, and that they refer to themselves simply as the teams. And then at the end of this quote, I love this part. He says, after all, there can be no leadership where there is no team. And I think this is really critical for us because in healthcare, we tend to sometimes get kind of pulled into our own little world and forget that we are part of a team, whether that team is FMDs or medical directors and training with other physicians or PAs, or whether we're talking about the team that's at the specific emergency department, nursing, staffing, all those kind of things. We need to be able to work together, and that's where the strength is in the team. I wanted to include this up front as well. The role of a leader is not to come up with all the great ideas. The role of a leader is to create an environment in which great ideas can happen. And I wanted to include this mainly because, again, Simon Sinek is a gentleman that's highly involved in team building and written a number of books to that regard. But I've found that the TEC or the Emergency Center leadership has really encouraged this type of growth and has allowed the teams to come up with the ideas and certain projects and move forward with those. So I thank them for their leadership in that regard as well. So the purpose of our discussion today is performance management. How do we see performance? How do we recognize that? And how do we fuel further performance improvement? We're going to be getting into a little bit of positive communication, and there was some studies that we'll review in a little bit that discuss more about the 5-to-1 ratio. Just keep that in the back of your mind for now. The source of truth is a concept where it can sometimes cloud a little bit of the feedback that we give. The meaning of the source of truth is kind of where do we see those, how do we see the world? And many times we assume we're seeing things clearly and things as they are, but in fact, we're actually seeing the world not as it is, but as we are through kind of our lens. And so, the only realm, or the quote there, the only realm in which humans are unimpeachable source of truth is that of their own feelings and experiences. And so we need to keep that in mind as we give feedback, that we are trying to give it in a consistent manner, something that can be improved upon. We neurologically tend to grow in areas of greater ability and strength. And getting attention to our strength from others catalyzes learning, whereas attention to our weakness smothers it. I remember when I was in medical school, first year in medical school, our dean came in and said, I want everyone to be studying in groups. And he gave some examples of that. He said that what we tend to do as we study and review is we tend to review the things that we know already very well. It's subconscious, and it's something that we just do without thinking about it. If there's something that we're really struggling on, we tend to ignore it. and push it kind of away. And so that creates these blind spots. So that was his recommendation. And in fact, it did turn out to be true that as we would review, some of the students would have a better grasp on something else, and we would be able to learn from each other in those regards. Um, so at the end of the day, learning happens when we see how we might do something better by adding some new nuance or expansion to our own understanding. Learning rests on our grasp of what we're doing well and not really of what we're doing poorly. So I wanted to give a couple of examples to kind of illustrate this a little bit. When I was an intern, I was on the trauma service, as I'm sure many of you were, and there was a particular trauma attending that was, it was kind of a quiet guy. He would slip into the room, kind of always hovering around, and would just seem to wait for the smallest thing to go wrong, or at least not go well in his mind. And I don't know if you guys ever had an attending like this. This is not obviously him, but kind of that thing, kind of that idea. He's in the corner, kind of hovering, waiting for something to go wrong. And the moment that something did go wrong, he would launch into a tirade of insults and calling out the person in front of everyone, and fairly aggressive at times, berating people. Usually these episodes tended to go against the residents in the program, but not always. A lot of times the interns would get the hammer, as well as he came to know, the sledgehammer. A lot of times the medical students would get it. And sometimes the nurses and other staff would actually get it. And I remember one time in particular where he laid into one of the OR techs, and they got kind of emotional. It was very rough. But as you can imagine, this created an environment of negativity and fear. It generally translated to an attitude or culture of reactivity, meaning people were rarely proactive, rarely going above and beyond. And in fact, just the opposite was the truth. Do just enough to not pop up on the radar screen was what most people would say. Don't draw attention to yourself, so don't step up, don't try to go above and beyond, because you will then have the spotlight on you. And so as we kind of went through this rotation, we learned, the best thing to do is kind of be a fly on the wall, try to be out of the way. And I do remember the residents telling me, if you draw down his wrath upon you for some reason, we are not going to come to your rescue. Everyone's kind of on their own. And so it developed this culture of try not to get hit. Culture was every man for himself. There was no real sort of team or unified culture except for that culture of just kind of fear and reaction. And the best thing to do, I was told as an intern, was to fade into the woodwork. Well, as with all rotations, you get through those, but I remember coming to the emergency department. And I wanted to give a contrasting example. There was an attending in the emergency department, and you probably know someone similar. Won multiple awards. Would always win attending of the year, an outstanding teacher award. He was a great mentor to the residents. The nurses and staff loved him. When he came through the door to start his shift, everyone would be excited to work with him. And I noticed that right when I first started residency. And then, of course, it takes some time to get to know these attendings and that kind of thing. But he was my attending on my first day as a trauma chief. Now, I don't know how everything was when you were in residency or where you were, but where I went to residency at Maricopa Medical Center, at the end of your intern year, or the last quarter of your intern year, you would then take your turn as the trauma chief, and the front room, which was a critical room, trauma bays and the sickest patients. And I was probably about 9 months into my intern year when this day I saw it pop up on the schedule. I thought, okay, here we go. It's about to get real now. So I'm nervous about all the what if scenarios. I'm trying to prepare as best I could, but of course, the night before you're worried about, a train wreck of people that are on Coumadin or something, Um, and so sleepless night. I don't know. Maybe I got an hour or two of sleep, but showed up to my shift a little early, and just having that idea. Maybe I mean, it could happen. Maybe there won't be any traumas. Maybe, I don't know if that's ever happened before, but, it's possible. But unfortunately, about 30 minutes into my shift, we hear over the loudspeaker red trauma now. That generally means that someone was kind of just dropped off and no preparation time at all. And so I know you've all been in this scenario, kind of the craziness of the trauma bay, everything happening all at once. And as the trauma chief, I was standing at the foot of the bed, and I was kind of taking in everything that was going on. And I put in the next slide. There's a little video of kind of the feeling I had, at least on the inside. Um, I You'll have to excuse me. I just love that video. But no, I didn't really do much. In fact, I kind of just, in all fairness, in all honesty, just kind of froze. And I just kind of stood there. And as you can imagine, you're in the trauma bay, everything's going on, and I'm not saying anything, and things kind of gradually get quieter and quieter and quieter until everyone's almost like, people are just kind of looking at me like, are you going to do something? Are you going to say something? So about that point, I felt somebody kind of behind me. And I heard these words. Give me, and it was in a whisper, but he said, give me 2 large bore IVs. And so I yelled out, give me 2 large bore IVs, and things started to happen a little bit again. And then he said, let's pull a full trauma panel with coax. I said, let's pull a full trauma panel with coax. Okay, the lab guys are going, nurses are going now. He said, let me hear that trauma survey. So I repeated this. Trauma survey is now coming. Things are starting to go. And then, of course, at the end, let's get the airway and get him to CT. This patient was pretty sick. As I remember, he was a person had been stabbed a couple of times, not too far from the hospital. But it was interesting, and I was grateful that he kind of pulled me out of that void there. And it wasn't that I didn't know what needed to be done. It's just I just froze, and I think that can happen to anybody, but it was the first time that it ever happened to me. So afterwards, they're rolling the guy out to CT, and then they went to the operating room with the trauma team. And I was not assigned to the trauma team. I was in the emergency department at that point. But he pulled me aside after the trauma, and he said, as best I can remember, he says, I'm glad you're here in the residency. I think you're a good fit. And I think overall you're doing well. Your learning and progress are on track. And he seemed to be sincere, but I knew that what happened wasn't awesome just then. So I was kind of waiting, but he did seem to be sincere about it. And then he said this to me, and this is a quote as best I can remember. What happened today in the trauma bay is not up to our standards here. I need you to do better and be better prepared the next time you are a trauma captain. Now, you can well imagine, if you have an attending that you really look up to say that to you, there's a wave of shock and kind of a cold sweat that goes over you. But after that happened, after that kind of anxiety passed over me, I realized he was right. And not only that, I realized that I respected him a lot for addressing it straightforwardly, honestly, and transparently. Because the easy thing to do would be just to walk away and say, well, I'm sure, Betz will do better next time. But I appreciated that. Now, here's my question. Which of these two attendings created more opportunities for growth and expansion? Which of these two attendings created more of a team environment? Which of these two attendings do you think the residents had more respect for and loyalty to? And which one of these attendings team would you rather be on? A study in 2004 was looking at the top 60 management teams, trying to find some common themes. And they were investigating why some management teams perform better than others. Teams were categorized as high, medium, or low performing based on performance metrics of productivity, customer satisfaction, and competency. They had some interesting findings, and this is out of the book Positive Leadership. They mentioned these studies, but the study identified the single most important factor in organizational performance, single most, that was more than twice as powerful as any other, was the ratio of positive to negative statements in communications. In high performing organizations, it was found to be 5.6 to 1. So for every negative or critical type of communication, there was 5.6 positive communications. In medium performing organizations, that ratio was 1.8 to 1, and poor was 0.36, or less than 1 to 1. So I can kind of hear what you're thinking. Okay, yeah, that sounds all fine and dandy, but I don't know. I'm not sure I'm really on board with this. And to be honest with you, as I was reading the book, I had that exact thought. And then he went into this other study, this additional study, done in 1994. It was attempting to discover factors influencing successful marriages. So different group, different focus. Couples were recorded for 15 minutes as they conversed. The topics that were given to them were sometimes controversial in relationships, such as child rearing, money, or work issues. And so they would review these videos. They had this 15-minute video, and then based on that, they were able to sustain some findings. The study found the best predictor of sustainability and quality of a marital relationship was the ratio of positive to negative communications. Again, the ratio was found to be 5 to 1 in favor of positive statements. So what they found in this study was that they were able to actually predict what marriages would be successful years down the road based on this 15-minute conversation. And because of how predictive that was and how reliable that became, and they repeated the study, were able to repeat the same results. They were able to find that, and it's actually referred to as the Gottman Index. And I've got a friend in marriage counseling. He says they still use that to this day. That feedback is critical. But the one caveat here is the feedback has got to be genuine. It's got to be authentic. If it's derived, if it's kind of made up, if it's just flowery kind of things, generally people see through that and can actually have the opposite effect. And so some of the things that we look at on our teams is, as we try to build our teams, valuable contributions they might bring, unique strengths, positive qualities, recent successes. I've got an example of a feedback that is maybe not as genuine or sincere here.
I'm stupid, you're smart. I was wrong, you were right. You're the best, I'm the worst. You're very good looking, I'm not attractive.
All right. As long as you're willing to admit that now.
Sorry, I have to work in a Happy Gilmore quote into every talk. But another example is the Dallas Cowboys coach, Tom Landry. I have to admit, I'm not a huge football guy, but as I discussed with my father-in-law, who is a big football guy, he was like, oh yeah, he was a legend. He built that team, and kind of said that he built this legacy with the Dallas Cowboys. But he had a little bit of an unconventional way of turning around that struggling team at the time. Most teams would review tapes of missed tackles, fumbles, and the plays that they screwed up. Of course, the idea there is, why don't we look at what we screwed up and then we can learn how to fix it and improve that way. Well, Landry said, no, we're going to do something different. We're only going to look at your winning plays. He wasn't doing it for the praise, in other words, to kind of, praise the players, but he felt that each player would kind of further improve if they could see and know what their own version of excellence was. So, in other words, he was finding these plays, looking at them, and then saying, okay, this is what it looks like when you're in the zone. He would point that out to them. So what he would do is, as they were doing that, he would point out this idea of what came to be called that, yes, that. In other words, he would point to what was happening and say, that is what I'm talking about. That is the zone. That is excellent, what you're doing there. The key, and there's some other teaching in this realm as well, but the key is to catch them in the act of doing something great. Now, that's not always possible. And in Tom Landry's case, a lot of times they were doing it in review with tapes. But that's what he wanted. He wanted to pass that along so his players could know what excellence looks like, where their strengths are, when they're doing great. I put in this tab that says pace in, just to remind me of another story. And I took over. I took over. There was a contract change in the hospitals, and we took over a different hospital. It's kind of a smaller ER and smaller hospital outside of town, about an hour and a half, 2 hours outside of Phoenix area, and it was kind of an isolated place, and there was a kind of a culture that had been established there prior to my arrival there. And in fact, I wasn't actually even on shift. I was up. They were switching over computer programs and EMRs and all that, and so I was there kind of helping with that. It wasn't actually the physician on. But I was working with this physician, trying to get all of his passwords and all these things going. Across the desk, there was a woman that was there with her father, and her father, I believe, was being admitted to the hospital, but she felt that something had been missed or was upset about the wait or something, but began to really kind of escalate. And initially, the nursing team kind of just ignored it. The people, and I was sitting there not exactly knowing what to do, as I wasn't even on staff of the hospital at this point. And then she really started to escalate and started to yell, someone pay attention to me, this isn't okay, that kind of thing. Just kind of escalate out of control. And there was a unit secretary that was there, and he was great. That was my first day meeting him. But he got up, and I remember looking around thinking, like, is the doc going to do something, or is the nurse? I don't understand, like, why is nobody addressing this? But of course, like, the new kid at the party, I didn't want to be like, hey, let me handle this. So I was kind of not knowing what to do. So this unit secretary gets up, he walks over to the lady, he puts his hand on her shoulder. He said a few things. We're going to take care of you. We understand that you're worried about your father, those kind of things, and just de-escalated the whole situation within about a minute. Well, guy gets admitted. They go into the hospital. Everything's fine. But I was so impressed with this guy that after about an hour, I mentioned to him. I said, what you did there was amazing. How you settled that patient's family member down and were able to kind of give them what they needed, kind of help put their mind at ease and stabilize everything. And I just thought that was great. I just wanted to mention that to you. And this guy was about maybe 50 years old, and he looked at me and he started to well up. And I thought, oh my gosh, like on my first day, I'm like making people cry, this is ridiculous. And I like almost felt bad for a second. And then he said to me, I've worked here for 6 years, and that's the first time anyone's ever complimented me on something. And I remember being shocked by that. But then I remember also as I came into the role as the medical director in that facility, there was easy changes to make. Positive feedback and complimenting and recognizing people, man, it really took over. And I think, to be honest with you, if you're in a culture where that is not the case, as this is implemented, it's a stark contrast. And really, that's the facility, that's the area that can make the greatest gains, the greatest changes. Well, you may be asking, like, how did this work out? Well, if you know anything about Tom Landry, won a lot of Super Bowls I read in researching this a little bit that he still got the best winning record for 20 seasons in a row or something like that. But like I say, now you really know I'm not good at football. But definitely success. And so, that's another example of kind of pointing out those positive features and letting our teams know when they are excelling. So, potential sources of positive feedback for our providers, RNs and staff, patient reviews and feedback, other physicians on touch-based sessions, administration, or if we directly observe them with immediate feedback. And that's really honestly the best way to do it. Although that's not always possible. It's a little bit different and difficult sometimes when we're just changing shifts or whatever. But if there's a chance to do that, or if you are taking sign out of a patient, you can take over that care and then get some direct observation there. So the question comes up: how do I apply this to my role as an FMD? Well, we got a lot of things that we look at for our providers: charts, workups, interaction with staff, interaction with patients, intelligence, work ethic, accountability, times they stepped up, procedural skills, communication. And so, as we do this, as we look for it, we can kind of keep in mind now that we're looking for these positive aspects. And actually, it will shift our mindset a little bit to be further looking for these, and will allow us to find those and pass those on to our teams. I wanted to include this, and I included this at our FMD day, but I wanted to include this on here as well. Part of what I do is I'll round or do shifts at some of the other emergency departments, the HSEDs around town. And the subject of the FMD always comes up without fail. And be honest with you, sometimes that's because I bring it up. But I like to get that feedback. And I would say that without exception, I get positive feedback about the hard work and the great job that our docs and our FMDs are doing. A lot of the quotes we get: we love Dr. So-and-so, feels like a team. Overall, we have a great team of docs. Dr. So-and-so is open and approachable. And I love hearing those things because, number one, I'm able to feed that back to the physicians. But number two, it just highlights what a great job they've been doing. And so I wanted to call them out on this and let them know that the hard work they are doing is not going unnoticed, and that they are building those cultures. And I really do appreciate it. So unsolicited positive feedback at random times is kind of the goal. If we can get that kind of pointing out that excellence, that's the best way to do it. There is some scheduled or organized positive feedback options. Dr. Heidenreich was able to give us an example of this at the FMD day, and he's also recorded a video that you can also watch that further explains that. But other options are touch-based sessions or grow conversations, which we're going to get into a little bit later. But remember, this is not just for the docs. This is not just for our providers. The team culture is felt by all. And so I would say, encourage the 5-to-1 with other members of the staff. positive statements to nursing and staff go a long way for team building. And the same kind of things that you can look at, um, tough IV sticks, good EKGs are done, rapidly getting patients back, handling critical patients well. All of those things are things that can be pointed out to our staff in a, it doesn't have to be an overboard kind of overly flowery type of way of doing it, but just pointing out, great job with that last patient. I really appreciate how rapidly you were able to, whatever it is. But be an example of that positive leadership to your staff. And you would actually be stunned by what positive comment can do to a tech or a par or a patient. And if you don't believe me, I challenge you on your next shift to say something positive. Just observe the par or the huck, observe the tech, and find something that they did great and compliment them on it. And I will tell you, you will see an absolute change in them. It's night and day. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what do I honestly want for my team? You know, really, at the end of the day, we want our team to be happy and fulfilled. We want them to be growing, learning, expanding, feel part of a team, and be loyal, responsible, and accountable. Transmit this culture to others around them. So it's not just us doing this. One of the ways that we can do this and communicate rapidly and consistently with our teams is touch-based sessions. These are individualized as one-on-one, monthly, and ideally they're done in person, but can be done over technology or the phone. I have found in my experience that over email or text, that kind of thing does not work very well because certain subjects just don't come up. And I think it's got to be at least a verbal conversation, but one-on-one's the best. The way I've found that works the best is to either show up on a day they're on shift, or if you're lucky enough to get sign out or sign out to them, that's a good time as well. But touch-based sessions, the idea there is to build relationships, build those, open communication, share examples of the values, discuss what's going right, and play to the strengths of them. Set up expectations for the near-term future, review priorities, answer questions and remove roadblocks, provide course corrections, and then coaching and mentoring. So it's one of those things. And I will say that a lot of times, and we're going to get into a little bit of this in a little bit here, but the grow conversation and coaching, but a lot of our people don't need a large coaching. They just need a little bit of encouragement as they move along. These check-ins are not in addition to the work you're doing as a team leader, though. They are really the crux of it. They are the core of it. And so I want to make sure that's clear. So, okay, so you're saying that's great for the docs that are doing good and that you're able to easily see positive things. But what about the doc that's causing trouble? What about the one that is making the nurses upset, or, irritating the staff, or maybe generating patient complaints? Don't tell me that just giving them positive compliments is going to change anything. So I want to answer that in a couple ways. First, remember my experience when I needed to be called out in the trauma or after the trauma bay issue that I had. It was a little uncomfortable for everyone involved. I assume it was uncomfortable for my attending. It was certainly uncomfortable for me. But if you recall, he mentioned that he thought I was doing well overall, that I was a good fit in the residency and all these things. And looking back, I realized, and I don't know if this was just naturally his style or if he knew this stuff that I didn't know at the time, but that 5-to-1 ratio was used. However, the issue was clearly explained. It wasn't just smoothed over. It wasn't just rose-colored glasses. And he clearly explained what the issue was. But that honesty, directness, and clarity made me feel as though the attending was on my side. And I actually felt like he wanted me to succeed. Like he had my best interest in mind. Like I was on his team. and he wanted to see me do better. That was the feeling I left with that. Of course, that and knowing that I needed to step up my game. But there's a program called the Grow Conversation that is a way of coaching, mentoring, and kind of clarifying issues that come up. I added a little bit to that because I added a little bit of the 5-1 concept to it. So it's a little bit of a hybrid. But I wanted to go over kind of how you use this tool. And I'll be honest with you, it's a tool that I've found very, very beneficial because these can be very difficult discussions. And I will tell you that most people, or a lot of people, I don't know about most, but a lot of people will just avoid these conversations altogether. One quick example of a guy that doc that I worked with, he was actually terminated, kind of like overnight. It was a weird deal. He was working shifts and I was working shifts, and then all of a sudden he was gone. And he called me a few days later, and he said, he obviously he was frustrated and a little upset, and I kind of said, like, what happened, like what's the deal? And he said, I guess hospital administration had to ask for him to be removed. And what he said to me though was really affected me, because he said that was the first time I'd ever heard of anything. That was the first time anybody ever said anything to me. And I was in some other meetings later where the hospital administration had mentioned that they had mentioned this to his medical director a number of times and were trying to get kind of like some, performance improvement. And I guess that medical director just never addressed it with him, just never had that difficult discussion. And I remember thinking that just doesn't seem fair to me. We all have blind spots. We all have things that we know we need to do better. And we all have things that we probably don't know that we have to do better. And if you don't have somebody that can kind of show those to you and kind of help you with that, be on your team, but at the same time say, hey, this is an issue we've got, then you end up getting blindsided like this poor friend of mine. And I felt bad for him, because I thought that just stinks to be working one day and thinking things are going okay, and the next thing you're being terminated for cause, being pulled off the schedule immediately, all these kind of things. So that's why I think this is critical, these grow conversations, this counseling, this coaching, so that we can get our teams and be clear on what's expected. I kind of broke up there's a sheet that we put together, but I kind of broke it apart into the different steps. So the 5-1 portion is begin by discussing some positive features that a provider brings to the table. I've heard people say, well, that can be kind of hard, but in all honesty, if you are honest with yourself, sit down, you can find something positive about anyone. And especially about a professional that's trying to do, their best or whatever. Think about what it could be. Maybe they're fun. The nurses love working with them. Maybe they're very brilliant. I remember one doctor I was working with was having problems with nursing and patients and things. But boy, I'll tell you, if he wasn't about the smartest guy I'd ever met in my life, any study you wanted to know about, he could tell you about. And I always admired that about him. Maybe, it's how the flow of the department or whatever. But begin by kind of giving some example of some positivity. That kind of helps to get them so they're realizing that you truly are on their team. And I will say that the natural tendency is to say, well, I'm doing this to kind of convince them that I'm on their team. I would answer that by saying, no, you need to be on their team. You actually need to be on their team. And if you can't be on their team, if you can't want to see them succeed, maybe try to find a partner or somebody that can. because like we stated before, this you can't be insincere and you can't be two-faced about this, or it's just not going to work. The next step is to establish the goal. So first, you need to talk to your team member and look at the behavior you want to change. Structure this as a goal. So questions you can ask is, how will we know when the team member has achieved this goal? How will you know that the problem or issue is solved? Does this goal fit with the team's objectives and core values of the company? And so, a lot of, like, when I start these, I will a lot of times say, I wanted to meet with you in order to find out what your future goals are of the group and kind of what you're thinking. That is an open-ended question, but it's also tends to get people's attention when you say kind of what is your goal going forward. The current reality, the identification of the current reality is important, and this is probably one of the most critical parts and the most uncomfortable part of this discussion. The best way to do this, I've found, is to explain what's happening right now. Explain it in non-accusatory or blaming tones. So there's no benefit to that, because then that will just put them on the defensive. Simply state what has been seen or reported. And also have some understanding that the provider may be completely caught off guard that they're being perceived this way. I had one discussion with a physician one time, and he was so caught off guard that initially he said, that can't be right. That just cannot be right. And he ended the conversation abruptly before we could get to any of this other stuff. And then he called me back about 2 days later and said, I have a hard time believing that, but if that's where we are, if that's reality, then I want to make some changes. And so sometimes it can take a little time. But I think another important part of this is where you become part of their team. So I've found one way that I've explained it is you say, okay, I wanted to let you know kind of where we are, where we find ourselves right now, what is happening right now, or what has been reported. And then keep it as a we type of situation, as opposed to this is what they said about you, and then you. You could say, as we do about we, kind of, then you become part of their team. But that honesty and clarity is really key. So, the example, I wanted to be clear and upfront with you. Recently received some feedback that you can be perceived by the RNs as unapproachable or aggressive at times. It's natural to ask a lot of questions about, like, who said that or what. That's not part of this conversation, though. It's just that's the reality where we find ourselves. So then as we come to grips with the reality of where we are and the fact that it's not at the goal where we want to be, that's when we start to explore options. So we have now explored the current reality. Where do we go from here? What are our options? Typical questions you can ask for this are, what else could we do? What obstacles stand in your or our way? What do you need to start or stop doing in order to achieve this goal? And so, a lot of times they'll say, like, what options can we come up together to address this behavior or perceived behavior in order to reach our goals and be where we want to be? And then the last portion of this is establishing the will. By examining the current reality and exploring the options, your team member will now have a good idea of how he can achieve this goal. But it's important to kind of put it into what will you do and when, and keep those very, very strict parameters. Otherwise, it gets into I'll try to do better. I'll check in with you, if there's another problem. That tends to not lead to any improvement whatsoever. And so questions are, what will you do now and when? What could you stop? What could stop you from moving forward? And how can you overcome this? And then when do we need to review this progress? And how can I be of assistance to you? And so a lot of times, if we're doing the touch base sessions every month, that's a good time to touch back with them. Sometimes it may need to be sooner. May need to be checking in weekly with them, depending on the scenario. But usually I've found that the monthly check-in, it gives them enough time to try to remedy some of these things, get the goals in mind and their action plan, and then check back in. If it is less than a month, in my experience, it is not beneficial because they lose that cadence, they lose that follow-up, they lose the accountability, and it becomes more difficult to even attempt any improvement there. This is a slide that I blatantly stole from Keith Butler, our CEO, but he had it in one of his slideshows, and I just loved it because I really think that a lot of times we say, what are we doing all this for? But I think, like it says, the highest reward is for a person's toil is not what they get for it, but what they become by it. And I would add what others that we work with on our teams, what they become by it as well. And so I think that as we grow together as teams, as we support each other, that can change the entire environment of our practice. Again, appreciate this opportunity. My name is Joel Betz with the Emergency Center. And I hope that you learned a little something, or I know I did putting this together. And it was a benefit for me, and I appreciate the opportunity to do this, and the leadership of Keith Butler and Eric Wilkie as well from the Emergency Center. Thanks.